Thank you, everyone. So welcome. This is the Job Search for Educators Virtual Employer Panel. We're really excited to have you all here today. My name is Katie Vagan, and I'm one of the Assistant Directors in the Office of Career Services on campus at Bridgewater State University. And we're, again, really excited for today's event. Before we get started, I do want to go over just a couple of housekeeping items. And again, thanks for bearing with us through all the troubleshooting here. This panel will be recorded as a resource for students and faculty. So after today's panel, we'll be sure to post this workshop on our YouTube channel. So be sure to check that out if you want to follow up on there. During the panel, if you don't mind just muting yourself so we don't have any extra background noise, that would be really, really helpful. And throughout the panel too, feel free to ask any questions that you have in the chat. My colleague Lauren is going to be monitoring that. And also know that we'll leave some time at the end of the panel to kind of open up our mics and ask any questions to our panelists. So before we get started, I did want to just mention a couple quick upcoming events. I'm just going to really quickly share my screen and show you a few things that are happening coming up this semester. So if you can see here, obviously today we have our Job Search for Educators Employer panel we're very excited about. But moving into April, we also are going to have virtual resume critiques. So our Education Employer and Residence program is an opportunity for you to sign up for a half-hour virtual resume critique with an employer partner. And so if you're interested in that, you can email me directly. Great opportunity. And then later that week, we also are encouraging students to take advantage of the Merck Career Fair. This is the Massachusetts Educational Recruiting Consortium. They put on an annual career fair every year for teachers and educators, and that will be happening virtually on April 22nd. And lastly, Bridgewater State's very own Education Career Fair will be happening virtually in June. So we've kind of pushed it a little bit later to accommodate for hiring during COVID. And this event, we already have almost 50 different school districts that are registered to participate. So you can register for all of these events on Handshake. And if you have any questions, you can just shoot me a direct email and be happy to help you with that. So with that being said, what I'm going to do now is come back to the regular screen. And I would like to quickly introduce and thank some of our colleagues from the College of Education who are either here or who have assisted us in preparing this event. So specifically, I just want to thank Marianne McKinnon, who's an Associate Dean in the College of Ed. I also want to thank Marilyn Rennie Stanton and Rachel Berryman, who are in the licensure office, as well as Mary Tangway, who is a field placement coordinator. And also thanks to my colleague, Laurent Trollin, who is here helping me on behalf of Career Services. So now, the moment you've all been very, very patiently waiting for, I'd love to start just by introducing our panelists by name, and they're going to take the stage and just have the chance to obviously give lots of great advice. So just to begin, I'd like to introduce our panelists. First up, Joseph Corazzini. Joseph is the Assistant Superintendent of Equity, Diversity, and Community Development within the Framingham Public School System. So again, welcome, Joseph.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks. So next we have Estelle Shachenge. She's a recruitment coordinator with the Up Education Network. Thank you, Estelle. And lastly, we have our third panelist, who I believe is here, Jeffrey Schoonover, who is the superintendent from the Somerset-Berkley Regional School District. And Jeffrey is also a BSU alum, having completed his master's in 2011. So you here, Jeffrey?
I am here. Can you hear me?
Excellent. Yes, I can. Thank you so much. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and get started, and our panelists, feel free to kind of decide who wants to start first, and don't feel like you have to answer every single question. If you want to hop around, totally fine. So just to begin, I'd love to ask you, what is the hiring process like in your school system, and how has COVID-19 affected that? Who would like to start?
This is Jeff. I can go.
Okay, cool.
So all of our job postings we put on through School Spring. That's really the only place where postings are processed. So from there, COVID-19 hasn't really impacted any of that aspect of it. What really has been impacted is the interview process for us, and we've had to adjust to some doing a lot of our interviews Zoom or other avenues rather than having them done in person.
Thank you. And Estelle or Joseph, do you want to give a sense of what your hiring process is like, kind of start to finish?
Yeah, I'll start. This is Estelle from Up Education Network. Our interview process, everything is virtual. I work for a school, so we do lots of things in person, so now it's virtual. The only thing that hasn't changed is phone screenings. That hasn't changed, so we phone screen first. And then those notes are sent to the hiring manager, and if the hiring manager approves of the candidate, then the next step, it's a Zoom. So it's in virtual face-to-face. So that is the next step, Zoom. And then if all goes well, I believe there's one more interview with like the leader supervisor, and then an offer is made.
Excellent. And Estelle, would you mind just taking a minute to explain a little bit more about Up Education Network? I don't think all of our students are as familiar with your organization.
Yes. So I work at Up Education Network. It is an educational nonprofit that has transformed and turned around schools in Massachusetts. And what I mean by transformed and turned around schools is that we focused on low performing schools in Massachusetts, and we turned them around into high level performing schools. And how we did that is we partnered up with the Boston Public School District and also the Lawrence District, because we have 2 schools in Lawrence and 3 in Boston. And we changed the curriculum. We also changed the enrollment process, and we also hired certain staff to support the teachers. And we believe doing that sets the student and a teacher up for success. So at our school, we have a director of social and emotional learning. They focus on the well-being of a child mentally and emotionally, and we also implement that into our curriculum. So that's one way we stand out. We also have a senior director of family partnerships. That person focuses on the students and the families. And then we also have school and staff support that supports the teacher. And so we've been successful that way. And we serve grades K1 through 8th, about approximately 2,500 students. We have 2 schools in Lawrence. They're both middle schools. And our schools in Boston, 2 are K1 through 8th, and 1 is elementary.
That's great. That's so helpful just to kind of give a frame of reference. So thanks. And
No.
Joseph, how about you? What is the hiring process like in Framingham?
I mean, it's pretty consistent with everybody else. You basically apply for a position, get interviewed. Generally, it's 2 to 3 rounds. If it's a teaching-based position, we try to see if we can get you in front of kids to see if you actually, besides interviewing, well, we want to see how you can actually facilitate a lesson or work with young people. I'll note that, we've done a lot of hiring due to COVID. We created sort of COVID positions, COVID classroom positions. So if folks are interested in, please reach out. It's $29 an hour. The positions are basically the days that school are in session, and they run through June. And it's helping us to alleviate some of our staffing issues with staff who cannot be in the classroom with kids. So it's, the class is being taught at the moment. Some classrooms sort of hybrid. And so as our students transition back into the school, it provides additional support for some of the teachers. I always encourage those positions because, part of getting into any school district is the ability to showcase your work. And oftentimes it's very hard if they don't know who you are. You're just sort of like a name on a resume for people to get a real sense of what you do. I oversaw community resource development and school time programs when I first came into the district as a director. And one of the first things I did was to redevelop the model to bring out of school times in the district so we could recruit young students of color, young potential educators throughout school time programs, for like coaching, mentoring, regular pay increases, and the ability to sort of develop their skill sets with working with kids first. I can teach anybody to develop a lesson plan. It's very hard for me to sort of them to sort of understand and develop sort of the youth development pieces if they haven't been ingrained for the time. So there's ways in which to get in, and shooting out the resumes one way, but I also encourage folks to look at other positions in a district that may give you sort of more paid face time with the hiring managers.
Thank you. That's a great point, just to kind of encourage students to look, broadly within opportunities within a district, get your face, virtual or in person there, and get to know people. So that's great. On this panel, we do have 3 employers from pretty different types of schools, organizations, and districts. So I am kind of curious to hear, how many teacher openings do you typically have each year, and are they typically in certain areas more so than others? If you wouldn't mind sharing a general idea for that.
Our big year is sort of the springtime, and typically we hire around 150 plus positions. It's kind of all over the place in terms of where we're hiring. It's people leave, people retire. It could be, I think in the last year, we probably hired, because of COVID, over 400 in various positions in the district.
Wow. Excellent. And I'm just going to take 1 second. Kristen, was there a question there?
Yes.
I saw that you have your hand raised.
Yes, Amy has a question.
Sure.
I'm wondering how, with deaf culture and being a teacher and working with deaf students, I work with deaf students, whether it's at the Learning Center or the Beverly School for the Deaf, or if those students are hearing, if you guys are willing to hire an interpreter, so that way I can work with hearing students as well. Because I've been trying to think about how best to communicate with hearing students. And so I'm interested how you might handle hiring a deaf teacher.
Okay, so I don't know if our employers all heard that, but it sounds like the question is, within your hiring process, have you ever hired a teacher who is deaf and having the ability to also bring in interpreters to maybe kind of work together to serve both students who are hearing and students who maybe are having hearing issues? Does that sound like the right question, Kristen?
Yes.
Okay, I don't know if anyone can speak to that from the employers.
Yes, so here at UP, we definitely try to accommodate anyone who needs extra services. So if we were to hire a deaf teacher, we would definitely also use an interpreter to work with the student. And we will also, I'm sorry. There you go. I'm working from home. We would also definitely hire an interpreter, and we also have IEPs for our students as well. So we would accommodate the best way that we can, and make sure that everyone is on board, and we're focused on the students' well-being, and the teacher also gets support. Here at UP, we also have professional development every Wednesday. It is an early release day for students, and the teachers stay in the building and go over professional development relating to teaching. So that will also be the opportunity for that teacher to get support. Beside the one-on-one with their supervisor, there'll also be support during professional development. And to answer the question, I haven't been here long enough to see a deaf teacher being hired, but we welcome that. And we do have steps in regards to how we would go about that process.
Great, thank you. So I think we're going to move on to the next question, but if anyone else needs to jump in, feel free. Just kind of wondering, what particular skills and experiences are you looking for in candidates, and how can they set themselves apart from others? Jeffrey, do you want to chime in there?
Sure. So when I am interviewing, and as the role of superintendent, the principals are the ones who are conducting most of the hiring process, and then they will ultimately send their recommended candidate to me for a final interview. But one of the things I'm looking for, and honestly, when students are coming to us from Bridgewater State, and for me personally, Bridgewater State and Rhode Island College are the two premier universities in the area. So I know that the candidates coming from Bridgewater are very well prepared. We've always had great success. So I'm looking at a candidate's personality. I'm looking to see. I'm not asking questions about what their what their learnings have been and so on. And I already know that they've been vetted that way. I'm looking at someone who I know is going to work well on a team, is going to work well with children, someone who's passionate, someone who has a good personality. Those are the types of things that I'm looking for in terms of I don't want to say skills, but some traits when I'm conducting those final interviews with a candidate. And in terms of experiences, if there's someone who has done some substitute teaching, or maybe he's worked in an ESY program for a school district over the summer and has begun to experience some of those things, those are just bonus experiences that we know beyond the practicums that they're already bringing some experience to us.
That's great to hear. And that's definitely something we've heard in the past, that they're really looking to see your passion and interest for working with kids in a teaching capacity, and anything on that resume that showcases that, whether again it's a paraprofessional role or a camp counselor role or a tutor role, seems to be great experience to highlight there. Joseph, did you want to add to that? What skills and experiences you specifically are looking for?
So people tend to look for people with professional experience, right? Like they want to see people have a proven track record. If you don't have that, then what you want to showcase is areas in terms of your resume where you can showcase some of those skills, even if it was in a smaller sort of context, right? Principals get a budget when they hire for a position, and everybody usually maxes out that budget, which means that they're trying to get people that are highly skilled and qualified that they can just basically rely on. So the trust factor and likability is a must, right? It's a huge thing, and the hard things to really control because it's all sort of built around bias. What I would say to folks in terms of when you're thinking about trying to set yourself apart, make sure your resumes and your cover letters are customized for wherever you're applying. People hate to get blanket drafts or see names or positions for other positions you applied for, just showcases like a lack of interest. Make sure you familiarize yourself with the area, the community, so you can reference that in terms of the interview. Have things ready that they don't ask you to have, like a draft curriculum or a draft like student plan that you created, or some other things in terms of family engagement that you sort of thought about. The extras help to set you apart from other candidates. Always make sure to follow up in terms of communication following the interview on thank you letters or responses. And remember, everything that you do is going to be scrutinized. So if you do it, make sure you do it well. Don't sort of half-ass it. Like make sure that your grammar and everything is on point.
That's great. So next question we have is, can you tell us what are some typical interview questions that you really enjoy asking? And also just how are you managing the virtual interview process right now?
I can go. One of the interview, I phone screen teachers, and I also phone screen non-teaching positions, like school nurse, school culture specialist. But for the teaching questions, I may ask questions like, "What is explain to me or share with me one of your most challenging days teaching, and how did you overcome that day to come back the next work day refreshed?" I might also ask, since up education schools are in urban areas, what is making them want to work in an urban area compared to a suburban area where there's more resources? So questions like that. And our interview process and just getting the applicant to apply and to talk to them and phone screen them. I definitely ask questions, and then once I ask questions, I send their information to the hiring manager, and then they will make the decision if they, were to be accepted or not accepted.
Great, thank you. other differences, you know, Joseph or Jeffrey, in your process with interviewing?
Well, one of the questions that I like to ask, and has a couple of variations, but just in terms of being in a school, either what makes you tick and what ticks you off, or what drives you and what drives you nuts. And I've gotten some interesting answers over the years by asking those questions, but as I was saying earlier, it gets into the person's personality and passions, and usually I've had some good conversations with teacher candidates and principal candidates by starting with that question. I get to learn a lot from someone from that.
I like that. That's an interesting way to put it. Thank you. How about you, Joseph?
So, I mean, with COVID, we like bought this system where HR loves it. They do like these pre-screen questions, interviews. So basically you get a prompt and you get like to record your message, and that recorded video goes to the screening committee. It's a way of sort of like getting through like the first round of interviews. It helps save time in terms of like scheduling and all that kind of stuff. And I don't know how schools have been responding to it, but I know that we've been using it in terms of the process. And I talked to a few candidates. Some felt it was awkward. Some enjoyed it because it gave them time to just reflect and think about some of the questions. Yeah, I mean, that's sort of my thoughts.
That's helpful. It's good to know too that different districts have different methods. Kristen and Amy, was there another question?
Yes, 1 second.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, hello again.
I'm sorry, could you say that again?
Yes, hello again. So I want to know about how, when you sit with parents and students in an IEP meeting, or when you're bringing in an interpreter, how with that student, do you make sure that they are having positive experiences at the school, and making sure that they are not suffering any language deprivation, making sure that they're not falling behind in an educational setting, and making sure that they are learning at the same rate as their other peers? How are some ways that you guys manage that with a deaf student?
This is Jeff. Honestly, we, Somerset and Somerset-Berkley, my two school districts, we are members of the READS Collaborative. I'm not sure if you're familiar with READS, but it's one of the special education collaboratives, and the main office is in Middleborough. But as a board member of the READS Collaborative, we have sites at various schools. I believe it's either East or West Bridgewater, but the DHH program is held within the Norton Public Schools. So typically, as a member of this district, when we do have a student, a DHH student, we tend to put them through the READS Collaborative, and then they will learn at Norton. So I can't speak on behalf of students within my own districts who fall into that category.
I would also answer. Here at UP, we also have a special education coordinator, and that special education coordinator also works with the teacher and works with the families to accommodate the student. So if there's a meeting that's to be scheduled, they would work with the teacher and the interpreter to make sure the interpreter is there to interpret for the teacher and the student and whoever else needs interpretation. And as I mentioned before, we have IEPs as well. So there's already like a data tracking sheet, tracking system for that particular student. And also our director of family engagement and partnership closely works with the families. So he's usually in touch with the family and what they need and the best way we could accommodate the teacher, the student, and the parent. So we're usually prepared in advance. We usually have a schedule and a data tracking system, and the special education coordinator is really good at gathering and working with the families for that.
Okay.
Thank you. We had another question in the chat, which was really good timing. Camille asked, how are school districts supporting teachers during this pandemic? And I was kind of wondering the same thing, how has COVID affected, your expectations of teacher effectiveness over the past year and moving forward?
So real quick, I can answer that. First, let me say, just for the student that inquired about, do we hire teachers who are deaf? I don't know specifically if I can't remember in my tenure, but I don't also oversee that direct hiring of every person in the district. I would say that if you're interested, absolutely apply. We don't discriminate. So I threw my contact information in the chat, and feel free to reach out to us. Be happy to have some conversations around that and potential accommodations we can make for staff members. With that said, in terms of how we've supported teachers, I mean, we leased out a child care center to the tune of about $30,000 to provide child care for free for our teachers who needed to have child care so they could come work. We also hired, I think, over 100 of those COVID classroom aides to ensure that teachers who couldn't work in person, either because of childcare or because of COVID-related or immunocompromised, whatever, sort of issues they've had, that they'd have somebody in the classroom that could monitor their kids who were in person so that they could teach remotely from home. So I think what we try to do is to, be flexible and fluid. We recognize that, this is an epidemic and it's challenging for folks to get through it. We're trying to take our dollars and think creatively about how we invest them to support teachers. And then we've also tried to include them within the process of decision making so that way we can, try to get ahead of some of the issues that we're dealing with.
That's great to hear. Jeffrey or Estelle, do you want to chime in too on that one?
Sure. Like Joseph, we've tried to be as flexible as we can with employees, particularly those with certain medical conditions that the teachers were feeling just a little, or I shouldn't say a little, a lot of stress and anxiety about being in school. So we did have a number of teachers who were working remotely. It really helped create our remote teaching model at the elementary level in particular, where students were taught exclusively by our own staff members during this period of time, and many of those teachers, remote teachers, were working remotely because of certain conditions. And then just trying to be flexible too. Our model was Wednesdays were a remote day for everyone, and we weren't requiring our teachers to be in school on Wednesdays. So for those who wanted to be, if that was easier for them, great. If it was best for them to stay home and teach from home on those days because of childcare issues, then they had that flexibility. So we're trying to meet individual requests as they came through from teachers.
Excellent.
Yes, I also like to contribute to that conversation. We definitely support our teachers the best way that we can, especially because they're the ones teaching the kids. So we have implemented the hybrid model. We started that in February. Before that, it was 100% online. We also did teacher surveys because we wanted to know how the teachers were feeling so we can accommodate them the best way that we can. So we also did that. And we also accommodate teachers with getting the COVID test. We provide a medical team comes to the school once a week to give the teachers a COVID test. That way they don't have to go out of their way to get tested. That's when we help them. Also, if there were teachers that had personal needs or medical needs, they reached out to HR and also their supervisor. So we also try to accommodate them in that way as well. We open a line of communication, understanding, and flexibility because it's, a different time. But we want to make sure that our teachers are set up for success so that way they could be successful in the classroom as well.
Thank you. Sounds like a lot of different creative ways at supporting teachers and staff members during this past year. And, talking about staff, the other side of it, which one of our students has asked, would be the students. So Allie in the chat asked, are your school districts placing a focus on the social emotional well-being of students, specifically hiring maybe more school counselors as they transition back into in-person classes?
Yes. Working on our code of conduct, we're hiring a ton of staff to meet the social emotional needs of kids. It's just the reality of sort of where we're at in terms of not just sort of the COVID crisis, but the overall growing needs of students and families in this community.
I'd say the same as Joseph, and one of the first questions you asked, Katie, was about where we're hiring and what the priority areas have been recently, and I would say special education and school counseling have been the two priorities, and we have hired a number of adjustment counselors, and I'm hoping to use some of the federal funds that will be allocated to school districts soon through this last round of federal money to hire a few additional counselors, knowing that we will absolutely need them over the next couple of years.
That's right. That's right. Thank you. Estelle, how about you?
Yeah, so at UP, we actually have a director of social and emotional learning. We have continued that and implemented that in our curriculum. So we have Open Circle. We continue that online. So that way, when it's 100% back in the classroom, we've already touched base on the well-being of the student. So an example of Open Circle is asking the student how they're doing before you start their work lesson. So it can be, how was your weekend? How are you? That way, they are in touch with their feelings, and the teacher also has an insight how they're feeling. And then also at the end of the day, we have closing circle, and that is when you ask them how was their day, especially when it's last period. Sometimes teachers do exit tickets, like a question before they leave the classroom, and if they do get it wrong, then there's like a follow-up. And aside from that, we also have a school culture specialist. That person helps the teacher if there's like any behavioral issues or how the child is doing. They take that student and work with them one-on-one. And then after, they return that student back to the classroom when that student is ready. But conversations always happen just to make sure that that student is well, because we believe the success ties with academics as well as, feeling good emotionally and so forth.
Absolutely. That's helpful to hear. We have a couple good questions coming in through the chat, so we'll just move through those. We have Brianna has asked, is COVID vaccination going to be a requirement for the hiring process moving forward?
No.
Not yet. Okay.
I don't think that's something that we can require.
Like a full.
So for me, obviously we're hoping that people are vaccinated, but to be required, I'd have to say no at this point. I'm interested to see if Joseph is thinking anything differently in his district.
No, we're thinking this. We can't make anybody. You can't legally make anybody take the COVID vaccination to work. We could encourage it. We are doing the testing similar to other districts to make sure that we're trying to do the pool testing to catch it. Want to make sure people have access to testing. We're encouraging people to take the test. We've worked with our local legislators. Locally, we have Senate President Spoka, who represents our region, and have worked to try to get more vaccinations out to communities, specifically communities in some of our more sort of under-resourced parts of our communities, and get it out to some of our staff and families. But you can't really make folks get vaccinations. What I'll say is that I've been in now 2 schools this year, 3 schools I should say, that have gone from hybrid to return in person. And there's always anxiety the first time when you walk into the building, and it's, for some folks it's warranted in terms of having being immunocompromised. But what I'll say is that generally after the first week, all the anxiety tends to sort of shrink down, because people see all the protocols, and literally millions of dollars invested by the district into PPE, into signage, into desks, and ways in which to separate. Going around and literally measuring every single desk multiple times in this building to ensure that it's 3 feet apart or 6 feet apart, or a lot of work that districts have done. There's been a lot of resources coming from the federal government to support it. So I would say that, be cautious, make sure you take care of yourself, but you should trust that the districts are doing their due diligence in terms of trying to ensure safety for all staff and students.
Thank you. I'm going to move on to the next question because a lot are coming in through the chat. Michael has asked, what part of a person's application, resume, interview do you take the most stock in? For example, is it their experience, their references, their extracurriculars, education, licensure? Is there one thing that you weigh more than others? Any thoughts on that?
I say, even though we look at everything, definitely experience and licensing, especially being a teacher, because if you have a certain license, then you can, or working towards a license, then you can teach a particular subject. We do accept teachers that are working towards their license. I have two colleagues of mine that work specifically with licensing. So you can start off with a pending license, or you're close to getting a license, or you want to get a license. We also hire that. But I think licensing and experience, if you have more classroom experience in the years, then you'll be maybe like a lead teacher with your credentials. If you have less experience, we do have a fellowship program, an up-teaching fellowship program that you work with the lead teacher to get experience for 2 years, and you also attend a master's program. And once you complete that master's program, then you have the opportunity to be a lead teacher in one of our Boston schools. So we also give room for teachers to climb that ladder if they don't have experience to get it. But I believe credential and experience is two things that I look in a resume, even though I look at everything, but those two make a difference.
Yeah, I agree. When I look at an application, I will read the cover letter first. I will look at their resume second. I honestly don't pay a lot of attention to transcripts, to be completely honest. And as I said earlier, I'm looking, if someone is coming to us from, say, Bridgewater State, I know that they are well prepared. So I'm looking at those few things, and I'm also looking for sort of like the Brock Holt of the Red Sox when he was a player. I'm looking for someone who can be in multiple positions. Dual licensing is really important. If you're a high school teacher and maybe you're certified in a math and a science, that's great. Elementary, to have the special ed with the elementary ed is ideal. So those are the sorts of things that I'm looking for on someone's resume as well.
Excellent. All right, a couple more questions here. So a few students were interested in this one. What is your view on master's degrees? They hear that some schools tend to want first-year teachers who don't have it at first because of the budget. Or would you say that no matter the budget, you want an initial master's degree for first-year teachers?
I think that from my perspective, what I hear principals looking for is really sort of like folks that are like duly licensed, so if you get that dual license, I mean, that's the ticket. If you've got like a background in like special ed and English learners, I mean, and especially if you're bilingual, boom, 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 like that's the Willy Wonka golden ticket right there. Masters is important, but I don't know if it's necessarily like a requirement, because it goes really depends on the situation. So like I would say, if you feel like you want to get your master's, get your master's. My experience for me personally when I got my master's was that I enjoyed the idea of theory and practice. So learning in the classroom and working, even though it was stressful over that course of time, like it really gave me a place to actually analyze the practices of people that I was learning and being able to reflect on that throughout the process. So I found it to be, for me personally, very, very valuable.
How about you, Jeffrey? Do you have particular thoughts on masters? Would that, sway you in one direction or not because of budget or cost or anything?
If I'm down to a couple of candidates and it's someone with a master's versus someone with a bachelor's degree, and even if they're both fresh out of college, maybe I would go with the master's with the extra training. But I'm not really looking at that, and And when it comes to the budget, I want to get the best person for the position, whether that is someone who would be hired at the first step, or whether it's someone with 20 years of experience and they're getting paid at the highest step. I just want the best candidate in the district. So I'm not really looking, fortunately, I haven't been put in that position where the budget is driving it so much that I can only hire people at the lower steps. And my own recommendation would be, if you can get your school district to pay for your master's degree, do it, rather than paying it for yourself along the way. So I would always encourage a student to try to get someone else to help you pay for those graduate courses.
And I can just say, you know, given that we do this employer panel every semester over the last several years, this question always comes up. And just kind of what Jeffrey said, I've consistently heard them say that they want the best candidate. So hopefully that should put some of you at ease who are finishing up with your masters and wondering if it's going to affect you negatively. I think they just want the best candidate, right? Okay, next question we have here from Jessica. How do your districts support teachers as they work collaboratively with other teachers in their department or outside their department for interdisciplinary instruction?
I mean, so in our district, teachers get, common planning time, and they have like team meetings, and, more holistically, like we have affinity groups that we've launched across the district to create places for teachers who may, based on their identity, feel otherized with our school communities. So we, our goal is to always find places to uplift our teachers and create sort of like leadership opportunities for them. And I think the beauty of public education is that there's so many different avenues to do that. There's so many ways for you to find another way to be challenged, to still be passionate and to make more money. That's what makes public education what I feel like an incentivized sort of like field. I'll pause there.
Other thoughts on that? Collaboration with teachers between departments?
Here at UP, we're really focused on the collaborative effort. We believe it takes more than one village to be a successful teacher and support the student. I mentioned we have professional development. That's one way that teachers get together because there's no students. The students are released early. So teachers will be talking to other teachers that are in different grade level and teach different subjects. And a topic is usually discussed amongst each other. So they break out into small groups and then return back in big groups. That's one way. Another way is teacher events that we try to have. I know it's COVID, so it's going to be online, but that's just another way for teachers to collab and brainstorm and just support each other. Another way is teacher meetings. That's another way. And then we also have teacher surveys just to see get their feedback and ideas that they have. We're really big on just getting their ideas so that we can continue doing the collaborative approach.
Thank you. Lots of good options there. We're going back to the master's question, maybe just real quick. A student wanted to clarify, if you have a master's and you get hired, is it common for a school to help you pay for some of your student loans? I think the answer to that is probably no, but just to confirm, usually they only pay for your schooling if you're currently employed, and that's an option at that district, correct?
That's how it works in Somerset and Somerset-Berkley. We do not pay for loans, but we will pay for the active pursuit of graduate coursework.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we have a couple more questions, and I want to be respectful of our time. We may go a little over since we started late, but Ryan is asking, if you had the choice to see a reference letter from either an education professor or maybe a manager at a fast-paced work environment, what would you prefer? Like if the student works as a supervisor at a grocery store, which reference would be a better letter for you?
That's a good question. I would probably prefer the supervisor myself, just because that person has observed the candidate working with others, working with customers and clients in a way, that would be my preference.
Other thoughts on that?
I would agree. The supervisor has seen that employee work and has been with them a lot and overseeing them work. So I would go with the supervisor because I want to hear how the employee is doing and they spent the most time with them.
Yeah, I'll be honest that like I'm not sure, in terms of usually my experience in terms of interview panels is by the time we get to the references, it's just a matter of like co-signing what we already know or what we already believe, I should say. So by the time unless it's like a close one or two, by the time I get to the references, like just co-sign, it's mere formality. That's been my experience in terms of the process. Like it really gets down to like the interview and your ability to showcase the work. I'll even get benefits of the doubt in terms of, the cover letter to me, as long as it's like generally formatted right and looks good and showcases some level of effort. I don't say it to minimize it. I say this to say to you that, getting a job is not just about doing the right thing, like paperwork-wise. It's about your ability to cultivate a relationship. And so when you are thinking about where you want to go and work, you need to be thinking about how you develop relationships. Who do you know that can vouch for you there, that can give, because there's so small things. And it's not like someone vouches for you and then you get the job. It's the idea that someone co-signs your work. Because people need to trust that they can put you in a room in a space with 20 kids and that things are going to be in control, right? That you're not going to do something inappropriate or that you're not going to be irresponsible or non-responsive. So, my advice to all of you is more so than thinking about those details, which are all important, also think about like, how are you actually developing relationships with districts, like specifically with individuals and districts that you want to hire you. Have you reached out to if you're a person of color or any person that identifies as sort of marginalized groups in this country, have you reached out to the diversity director? Have you had like an informal one-on-one with them? Have you, reached out to a school principal who you may not even know and just say, hey, I'm interested in, in being in career education, like to pick your brain, right? Like those kind of things help to put a face to a name and it shows the level of interest that people generally don't do. A lot of people just submit resumes and cover letters to as many people that will accept them. You really want to do your work in terms of trying to build out some of those relationships, because that's ultimately what's going to get you sort of like to those later stages of the interview process, where hopefully you can persist and obtain a career or a job, I should say.
That's a good point, to kind of go on the extra step to just do a little bit more networking within the district and kind of getting to know professionals. Okay, so we probably have time for maybe 2 or so more questions. This one I think is another quick one. Somebody said, would you want to see a recommendation letter from your student teaching supervisor since they saw you teach and grow as a student? I think that's a yes, right? A resounding yes.
Okay. Me.
Okay. All right. Another question here. If you've been hired as an LTS teacher in special ed for maternity leave after your practicum, how do you highlight and use that? I think that's a long-term sub teacher is what they're asking.
A portfolio of some of the work that you did is important. So again, like it's the extra work, right? So you can put it on, I've done this, so it shows cases that you have a past practice of them being able to be in the classroom longer and to do more of the teacher type responsibilities. But again, like showing the work helps to take away the idea of whether or not people assume you can or can't do. So showing a curriculum plan that you developed or showing multiple ones you developed gives greater clarity in terms of like your work than people trying to imagine what your work may look like based on sort of questions that are, that don't necessarily get to sort of like the actual production of work.
Forgive me, should that be on paper or digitally?
It's always good to have paper copies when you go into an in-person interview, but digital is fine as well. I mean, but if you go into an interview, I mean, you want to have all your stuff with you to be able to hand out and have multiple copies ready in case there's multiple people being interviewed.
Thank you.
Excellent. So we might have time for one more question. I don't know if anyone is interested in asking a question. You feel free to open up your mic. I'll give it a second. I think we've covered everything that's in the chat so far. Any final questions?
I actually had a quick question. So I was just wondering for all of the panelists, what are some of the differences that you have found between when you first started to get into education as a career versus now? I mean, with the exception of COVID, is there anything that you would recommend that you may have done differently and compared to what you require from candidates now?
Ooh. Something with social media. When I first started, there was no. I'm going to fumble through this. We have gone through interview processes, and part of the review that certainly that some principals take is to just find someone on social media and just see what kind of posts that they have. And that has actually caused principals to not offer someone the job who was their top candidate previously. And certainly that wasn't, I've been in education for about 25 or so years. That was certainly not something that we're dealing with back then. So I would say that's certainly been a change.
I would also say social media definitely, but we do look at LinkedIn profiles. That's like the professional Facebook, I say, just to see, their experience and if who we interviewed kind of matches or it's the same person. So definitely social media and technology overall has advanced than before. So I say just technology, and it's quick to access things also. And then also digital books, you don't have to have a physical book. Digital copies or just downloading is also different and has helped as well. So I think that technology overall.
Okay. Any
Katie,
final thoughts on that? Yep.
Katie, can I add one thing kind of unrelated to this, but I think it connects with a previous comment or question. So in Somerset-Berkley, I have Somerset's a pre-K through 8 district. Somerset-Berkley is a regional high school. I have about 2,700 students total from pre-K to 12. Unlike Framingham, which I'm guessing Framingham probably is in the neighborhood of 8,000 to 9,000 students, and the Brocktons of the world, which are much larger. So if a candidate is looking to get into a district maybe of my size where we don't hire as frequently as some of the larger districts do, principals don't like to go out on a limb sometimes for candidates. A lot of times they're hiring people who did their student teaching with us, or they've substituted with us in some capacity. They didn't find that job right away their first year out, and they took a paraprofessional job, and then in year 2 now we're offering them a position in special education because we've gotten to know them. It's less of a risk because hiring a teacher is a huge financial commitment by a school district, and over the course of a lifetime, you're probably talking about $500,000. I'm sorry, not $500,000. $5 million per teacher in investment. So I would just say for those candidates, if you know what district you want to get into, perhaps I try to get your foot in the door in some capacity. Make yourself known to them, because I think that would ease your hiring process quite a bit, I think, at least in my experiences.
Absolutely. Thanks for adding that. Any final words of wisdom, Estelle, Joseph? Anything else you wanted to touch upon before we wrap up today's panel?
Yeah, remember that there's stipends in districts. So when you get into a district, go take a look at your contract, see what stipends are available. People get paid for coaching, they get paid for clubs, they get paid to be representatives for the union, they get paid for a whole bunch of things. And all that adds to your retirement. So when you're looking at that stuff, if you're thinking about being in education for a long time, and or if you get in early and you're looking saying, hey, I could use some more money, look at the stipends and see if there's interest on your part to do a little bit extra work. I find that a lot of people in the district have been able to carve out significant amounts of increases to their salary simply by doing, by leading a club, maybe coaching a team, maybe running additional programs during this after school or during the summertime.
Excellent, thank you. Estelle, any final words of wisdom? All right, well, we are so thankful. Oh, did you want to chime in there? Okay. Well, we're again so thankful and grateful for all of our panelists participating in today's virtual employer panel. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your patience and all the troubleshooting we had to do at the beginning. I just want to reiterate again that Career Services is here to assist you throughout your job search. So you're welcome to work with our office through an appointment to talk about your resume, cover letter, interview strategies, networking, all of these topics we've been talking about today. You can just give our office a call. I left your phone number in the chat. And if you are interested in any of the upcoming events, whether it be the virtual resume critiques or the upcoming career fairs, definitely get in touch with me. I put my email in the chat. Any questions, just let us know. But just want to give a virtual round of applause to our panelists. And thank you all so much for your time. And best of luck as you pursue your job in education and teaching. So thanks, everybody.
If I may interrupt, I just have one last question.
Oh, okay.
I don't
sure.
know. I don't get out of here soon. So for the panelists, like when you guys are reviewing cover letters, right? Like what kind of things would you consider to be like redundant as you read them? Because I mean, naturally, as I write a cover letter, I want to kind of, adhere to a certain formula. But what things would you consider as like already talked about or already covered?
I would just say that, like, I don't know how to answer that other than to say I'm looking for uniqueness in the letter. Like, show me that you read, like, the school improvement plan. Show me that you read the district improvement plan. Reference something that's happening within the school in terms of, like, family engagement. I saw that you're doing this work on social emotional learning. I read about it in your newsletter. I'm really excited about that. Shows me that you're interested. Show me that you did some work, right? One of the pet peeves that I have is if you're coming to interview in a district you're not from here, and and I ask you, well, what do you know about Framingham? If you don't know anything, then tell me that you're not interested, right? If you come and you say, you know what, I was reading about this, and I watched some of your videos on your website, or I watched some things on YouTube. I saw this community organization and some of the work they did around these kind of fairs, and like that shows me that you're actively trying to, work in this district. I was talking to the superintendent about this, and he was saying how before he interviewed for this position, he literally just sort of spent an afternoon in a coffee shop downtown and just had conversations with different people about their own educational experiences in town, just to get a sense of like, what people thought about the public school system. It wasn't like he was like, hey, I'm trying to be superintendent, come on and talk to me. It was literally just like, hey, how are you doing? Right? Like you're actively like trying to learn about the environment that you're trying to work within, because you got to figure out if it's actual fit. Getting a job isn't great if you don't fit. Like if you don't coalesce around their values, their organization's focus, it may pay you money, but you're going to be miserable. So you want to find a place where it's like, you like the people, you like where the direction of the district's going, you like your leadership team, and you're on board with trying to work together to make it better.
I see. Okay, thank you very much for that.
I couldn't agree more. And as Joseph said at the beginning, too, check those cover letters to make sure that it is personalized for the district you're applying to. I reviewed one last week, and it said, I am very anxious to return back to my my original school somewhere in Connecticut. And like, okay, Somerset's in Mass. You forgot to change it from your last time you submitted it, so just don't make those mistakes.
Right, of course.
That happens
You'll
a
be
lot, I bet.
Yeah.
And I know we kind of were wrapping up, so Joseph or Jeffrey, if you have to jump off, let me know. There was just one more question that I did see in the chat. Samuel had asked, how do you consider students of color in your hiring process?
we're actively trying to recruit. It's part of our, we put $50,000 into an equity audit for the district. We've got substantial money invested in terms of trying to increase our number of students, of staff of color in the district. So, I say any student out there of color who's interested in a career education, interested in potentially some opportunities in Framingham, you see a position or you just want to have a conversation, give me a phone call, shoot me an email, we'll schedule something. I've got a pretty crazy schedule, and it might take me a couple weeks, and I probably only give you about 30 minutes of my time, but you'll get 30 minutes of my concentrated best attention span that I can give you. And if there's something I can advocate for, I will. I regularly attend diversity fairs and recruitment fairs, and I've been able to recruit both staff of color, administrators of color at some of those fairs. And so, sometimes it's just as simple as asking a principal to say, hey, I came across this resume. I think it'd be good to just, include them in the interview process to give somebody a chance. And those small opportunities oftentimes can lead to some really good outcomes in terms of diversity recruitment. So feel free to reach out. My email contact is in the chat.
If any students are looking for contact information and you can't find it in the chat, you can reach out to me and I'll share that as well. So again, thank you all so much. I think it's time to wrap up. We've taken a lot of extra time from our panelists. So thank you all so much for being here. Really, really appreciate your partnership with Bridgewater State University. And we look forward to our students hopefully working with your districts in the future. So thanks everybody and have a great rest of your day.